I think that having the love of your dreams is a choice that you can continue to make every day. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Uncovery podcast. My name is Maddie, and I used to have anorexia, and I used to talk a lot about it on this podcast, and now I'm recovered and doing other things with my life, like growing a baby, and this podcast is evolving in shape, but I'm really happy you're here, if you're here, and if you're listening. And last week, talked a little bit about sort of the reason for the approximate 1.5 to 2 year hiatus on the podcast. And today, I think I'll talk a little bit more about what happened in that period, which a big chunk of it was basically this little love story that then ended up unfolding and resulting in this little baby and me being engaged. So I thought, we would have, in a world of what is just constantly seeming negative and upsetting and overwhelming on social media and other, basically all forms of media, both for myself and for everyone else. Maybe there's like a good story that we could just focus on for a minute, which also gives you a little bit of more detail and context for the update to my life, which has happened in between the last 2 years. And so that's what we're gonna just talk a little bit about my love story today, and then talk a little bit about current update and the next steps of life. And that's kind of the goal. So last time I talked a bit about dating in 2023, and I talked a bit about how having an eating disorder and dating are like 0% compatible. Eating disorders and relationships are 0% compatible, in my opinion. All of this is my opinion. All of this is my opinion. I don't need to caveat with this is my opinion. Eating disorders and relationships or love or dating do not mix with each other. It doesn't work well. I just wouldn't recommend it. So dating in 2023, I had some, moderately positive experiences. I had some moderately negative experiences. I'd had a lot of just moderate nothing experiences, but I wasn't that stressed about dating because I think I have always kind of held this belief that the energy that you put into it is the energy that you will get reflected back to you, and that any sort of anxiety that you have ends up sort of just perpetuating itself and exacerbating itself more. That was always my experience when I dated. So having a mindset going in of, this is going to be great, or this could be great, but also if it's not, and this, whoever this person is isn't your person, that's also to be expected. That's kind of how it goes. So anyways, I was traveling basically every month of 2023 for work or some other reason, and I was having kind of some quite extended trips, some short trips, but there was never really a month of that year that I was in Calgary for a month at a time. And on this particular occasion, I was going to Florence, Italy, and I was flying out of the Calgary International Airport. And I decided in the lounge, even though I was going to be away for a week, I was like, I think I'll check my Bumble. So I'm in the lounge, just let's see what's here. And right at the top was this little square. For anybody out there who hasn't been on a dating app, which is probably a vanishingly small percentage of the population, but you just get a little, it looks just like a little card, a square of the person's first picture, and that's it. And it had gone right to the top because he had sent me a message along with it. Basically, he had sent me a message It was great. I looked at his profile. I was like, this is all kinds of green flags. Had some things in common. And I had seen that he had lived in London, that he was from London. And I was like, because I lived in London. For anybody that doesn't know, I lived in London for a couple of years. I did my master's there. I had a very, very complicated relationship with London because of how, I would say, severe my eating disorder was and became while I was living there. So anyway, I have a history with London, but that felt interesting to me as well. So anyways, I messaged him back, and immediately he sent me a voice note, which would then be a sign of things to come in the rest of our relationship, even up until today. But he basically sent me this voice message and had this just like dreamy accent. And I had assumed that he had moved from London already to Calgary, but he was on this kind of extended trip because he wanted to live in Canada. And so anyways, we sent a couple voice notes back and forth, but I then had to go on my plane. And I was afraid that the international travel would like somehow reset or delete my Bumble to, I don't know, like accidentally just like be Italian being met, which is not what I wanted. So I said, here's my WhatsApp, just in case my Bumble does something weird as I go overseas. So I get on my plane, and the next kind of 5 days, the pattern is I wake up in Italy to some kind of, extended voice note talking about him and his life and his work and whatever we had, last talked about. And I would get up, I would listen to it on this like little tiny treadmill in this little tiny Italian gym at this hotel that I was staying at. And then I would have to go and do all of the work that I was meant to be focusing on for the entire time that I was in Italy, while like constantly thinking about this, wanting to voice note this guy back. And then I would, finish, but I would always listen to this voice note and then respond in the evening. And then I would go to bed because we were, at that point, I guess it would be like 8 hours time difference, which would have been the kind of training wheels for then the portion of a relationship where we have been apart. So that was a pattern for 5 days, but at some point we had arranged to actually meet up when I got back. So at that point, I'm really excited about this date. So all of the exchanges, all of the voice notes that we had exchanged, it kept being these moments of like, oh, wow, really? Like me too. Considering that we had come from completely different places in the world, completely different childhoods, completely different backgrounds. And we're already covering in these extended voice notes, like not surface level things. And I'm continuously thinking to myself, like, this is a lot in common. This is like a strange amount of things in common. And maybe I'm underestimating how many people are actually just very much like me, that maybe I've just like never had an original experience in my life. But I've always found this divide in myself between sort of, let's call it like my financy side, my analytical, critical side, more concrete, more black and white, and this other sort of like spiritual or more woo or more yoga and kind of feeling like I'm always in both of those worlds simultaneously, and that I really value both. And I had not ever experienced before like being with a person, especially romantically, that also embodied all of that across that entire spectrum in equal measure. So this was already like majorly exciting to me. I didn't even like mention the fact that he was insanely attractive. So this is all looking very good to me. I was very excited to come back. He was super proactive in like planning a date for that Friday night. And so I was like, this is a dream. This is great. I'm very excited about this. And so the day that I was to land, I'd gotten up at, I think probably like 3 or 4 in the morning. The taxi that took me to the airport in Italy crashed into a cement pole in the airport parking lot, not like at speed because we were in the parking lot, but but just directly, like, I do not know what this person was looking at. I do not know what this guy was doing, but I had gone into my bag to pull something out, probably like my passport or my phone or something. And I look up and there's a cement pole coming directly for the taxi. Anyways, so that happened. And then I'm again in the lounge waiting for the flight. I fly to Amsterdam and I start to feel not good in my 4-hour layover to Amsterdam. And then I was so ill on my layover in Amsterdam. And I was like, this is a worst case scenario, because I knew that he was traveling and I didn't know how long he was necessarily going to be in town. And so I was like, this is the worst. But as I took my flight back to Calgary, I got worse. Somebody probably thought I was like hungover from an Amsterdam trip, because, you know, like when you're like kind of folded over and just feeling so bad. And so people on that flight probably were like, oh, this girl has a hangover. She doesn't. She did not. She was just like coming down with what felt like the flu. So I was like, this is a disaster. So I got picked up at the airport by my parents. I'm like laying horizontally in the back seat because I can barely stand up by the time that I get home. And so I text him and I say, look, like, you wouldn't even be meeting me today. I am in dire straits. And this man tells me, no problem, obviously, just like, you know, we'll work it out when we can. We'll see each other when we're meant to. Also, here is a list of supplements that if you can get your hands on them today, then it could really like turn things around for you. And I was like, this man has now sent me like a personalized supplement for healing rapidly, which, you know, ended up being in both of our best interests. And so I go home, I get them. We keep texting back and forth. And then I'm basically like, you know, if I'm better by tomorrow morning, could we do tomorrow morning? So I wake up after having these magical supplements and I feel better. So we go for coffee. I meet him and he's like the most magical person in person. The energy was just, it's so difficult to describe because you hear about this sort of phenomenon of like when you know, and when you meet somebody and it's very special. And when you're a single person and you haven't really experienced that, then it kind of seems too abstract. And then it happens to you and you're like, oh no, that is real. And this sort of evaporation and compression of time that happens when you're with someone. So we talked about everything under the sun. This is maybe a good place to say that I really would like to interview him for the podcast because he has his own story and journey that I think would be of incredible value to many, many people. I think that he should be writing a book. I think he will. One day he will. But he's going to be a great guest on the podcast. He's not a huge social media person at all. But I think with some coaxing, I could get him onto the podcast to do an interview. I think that would be great. But I learned all of these things about him, and the time flies by. I actually have an appointment that day, so our date basically gets interrupted by the fact that I'm already half an hour late to this appointment. Like, I didn't even look at my phone. So I have to take off. I'm like, this doesn't feel finished. Like, I start kind of like internally panicking that this date has had to come to a close. And he's so chill. He's like, that's all right. He's like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just, you know, I checked out of my Airbnb, so I'm just kind of around, you know, when you're done your thing, just come back. And so that's what I did. So we had sort of another date that afternoon, evening, and went for food, and he had found this rooftop to go to, which, like, in not his city, he's the one making the plans, and I'm just kind of passenger princess, which has held true in a lot of ways to this day. I have lots of thoughts about masculine and feminine energy, by the way, which I could probably just like do a small episode on alone, but there is something very comforting and safe feeling about a man who just kind of like takes the lead and just takes care of things and does things. And it doesn't mean that you're incapable of doing them. It just feels very good to have someone take initiative and think ahead and have a plan and that was my experience of him on day one, and that is my experience of him today and every day in between. So that's kind of, I guess you could call it 2 dates. And then I had to go to my parents that evening, and I was like, shoot, that still also feels like not enough time. But he was leaving for South America the next day as part of this like big trip that he was doing. So I said, I could drive you to the airport tomorrow. Do you need a ride to the airport? And he did. So we arranged to just meet for coffee and then take him to the airport the next morning. So it was kind of like these 3 dates within 24 hours that ended up happening. And then I'm taking him to the airport. And because his plan hasn't been finalized for, when is he moving to Canada and where in Canada specifically, because that hadn't been established at that time. So I was like, I'm very excited about this. This has been incredible. And also, what if I never see this person again? I don't know. You never know if you're going to see someone again if they live locally and you go on a date with them, right? You're like, you never know those things. But certainly if they live on the other side of the ocean, then you're like, oh man, well, hopefully he's coming back soon. So anyway, I took him to the airport. It was all very sweet. And that was sort of that first portion of us being together. And to be honest, from that point, I had no interest in continuing to date anybody different ever again. I don't know if it was then that I don't know that I deleted my Bumble yet, but I definitely wasn't on it. We'll say that. So he spent 3 weeks in South America. And during that period of time, the voice notes it's almost like a running thing with us where those voice notes back and forth, which obviously I do podcasting, right? So I can talk into a microphone about all kinds of things for a very extended period of time. I've met my match on that front because we would send these podcast 30-minute voice notes back and forth. While he's traveling in South America, I'm just, in Calgary living my life. And again, this lovely pattern of consistency and knowing I was going to hear from him and having photos from his travels and feeling like a part of his life experience, despite the fact that we had just really only met very recently. At some point, I said something cheeky on a voice note, well, you can come back now. You can totally come back to Calgary anytime. Don't even call it. It's barely flirting, but it's sort of flirting. And then I hear from him and he's like, I could just come back. And so to compress a little bit of the story, he ends up booking a flight back from South America to Calgary, which if you do the math, which I did, is 30 hours of travel in the opposite direction of where he was actually going to be going, which was back to the UK. So he comes back to Calgary, and I didn't know how many days he would come back for. He at some point would need to return to the UK, but he ended up coming back for 5 days, and that I think was the real solidification of, this is not just anything. This is very, very special, and I think both of us knew that early days, even during sort of the period that we were apart when he was in South America. It just was very obvious to us both that this was, something very special. So after those 5 days of him staying in Calgary, us doing some traveling out to the mountains and some hospital visits, there was nothing like sitting in an Alberta Health Services waiting room to really can you do life things together with this person? We were doing relationship hurdles and tests very early days. But that period, by the time those days were done, was we're together now. Without having to even really say, it just happens. And when I think and when I see stuff online now, especially where people talk about having the conversation, or are people talking? Are they seeing each other? Are they dating? Are they official? Are they exclusive? Are they girlfriend and that seems so foreign to me and also quite unhelpful in a lot of ways, where my belief, and this is pre this relationship, I think if you just lead with, I want to be with you, and then you just be with that person, and this like kind of, I've always been sort of like a one at a time sort of dater as well. Like it always felt very uncomfortable to me that you'd be dating multiple people. It's never really resonated, but that you wouldn't just be all in with someone when you can be, and then if it doesn't work, that's fine, but you don't have to like stay in these made up phases before actually just like being in a relationship with someone. I don't know, but without having to have some kind of like, are we girlfriend? Like we were just together then. That was it. I was so sad when he left because I wasn't sure exactly when we'd be seeing each other. We had a conversation on the day he left that was basically he saying, you know, when can I see you again? I'm like, anytime. Now I'm in a very privileged position that my work can be done from anywhere. So for me to travel is easy in theory. Obviously my life is in Calgary, but I can work from anywhere. I kind of make my own hours being self-employed. The contracts that I have and the work and the clients that I have are actually overseas and beyond London. So to me, it made perfect sense for me to, you know, visit there whenever because I could work from there. And his contract was more localized. So it just made sense. So from that point, it basically became trips in the short term and like multiple trips in a short period of time, because it was like there couldn't be enough time spent together. And at the same time, the, let's call it long distance portion of being in a relationship was incredibly seamless and felt very easy, despite obviously you miss them immensely. But if you do long distance correctly and only for a short period of time, my belief is that you can make it actually a really positive experience. But you need to be very consistent and very intentional, which both of us were. Just like he did not miss. You know what I mean? Like there was never any like, oh, I haven't heard from him, but you know, hopefully I will, or will I? Like it was always exactly consistent. It was completely, I've never had less anxiety in a romantic relationship in my life, where I just like knew that he would continue to show up, and he always did. And I reciprocated as a result. Like we both just did the most seemingly straightforward thing, which is just to continue to show up and continue to develop the relationship, whether we were physically together or we were in a period of being apart and being long distance. But it was a lot of, voice notes and photos and videos and, you know, FaceTime calls and we showed up to everyone, and it wasn't like, oh, I'm running late or I can't do it today. It was like when you are with someone, you just treat them like they're a priority, and then the relationship it can't fail. If you respect someone, treat somebody like they matter, and like keep doing that over and over, that like love builds. And people say, you know, like love is not a feeling, it's behavior. I think it's both, but the behavior and the consistency of behavior is what will create the firmest possible foundation. And in a long distance relationship, which by the way, I never ever thought I would be in one. I was always the person that was like, that is a bad idea. There's no way, much less starting a relationship long distance, like 0 out of 10, not doing that. It depends completely on the who. It completely depends on who it is. It does not have to do with the distance. What I will say is that aside from just like the consistency and showing up and making that person feel like you are present with them as much as possible, you also need it to be finite. Like you need to have a trip planned or an end date to the long distanceness at all. In our case, I think I took 2 trips out in the span of a couple of months. And by that point, he was moving into a new flat in London, and I was landing the day that he moved, and basically we moved him in together. And the way that he handled that and giving me my own space in his flat and making me feel like I lived there and giving me a key and signing me up to the building gym. That's kind of when I would say we were basically cohabitating, and I was sort of like coming back to Calgary for work or life or, you know, visits. But that basically from that point on, my primary location ended up being London. So there was no discussion. Again, there was no, will you move in? It's just like, it just very organically sort of developed and happened. I have learned a lot in that, like in the process of that part of the relationship, for sure. I have been in awe of like how easy love can be with the right person, and when you do the right things, and when you build things into the beginning and foundation of your relationship and don't slack on them. Like you keep doing the same things that you did at the beginning now and forever. Because I think there's some very unhelpful narratives in relationship, kind of media and popular culture about honeymoon periods and things having to change. And even though change and evolution, I think, is totally natural and normal in a relationship, I don't think it's an inevitability to have that be a negative change. I think that if anything, it should only like grow and get more and more positive and more close and just get better and better. But I completely disregard any trope or even data, even like averages of, you know, people tend to go through these phases of the relationships, and they tend to then kind of, you know, drift, and it becomes more like less passionate and more this. And there's no denying that like the very beginning of the relationship is a physiological intense period where like obviously like your hormones are all raging and like your dopamine is off the charts, and like obviously, and there's like a level of floatiness and intensity that is actually just unsustainable. Like you actually, like you eat that whole, like you can't eat, you can't sleep, like all you think about is this person. Like you need to be able to function in your life for like the rest of your life. And so perhaps if you felt that intensely forever, like maybe that would actually like be debilitating to getting things done, because I remember it being a very distracting period of time. However, like that level of, I'm excited to see this person, I always want to see this person, I'm always going to prefer to be with this person than not, that doesn't have to change. I don't believe that has to change. I think that having the love of your dreams is like a choice that you can continue to make every day. So that's corny, but actually I think that I can back it up. So my number 1 tip for long distance relationships is consistency. And my number 2 is having it not be long distance for all that long, really. But I think about those times actually really fondly. Like I missed him immensely when I was away. But then when I would go back, I would be so excited to see him, that the magic like reset every time that we got to be together. So all in all, we spent more time together than we did apart in like, let's say the first year of our relationship, because I just basically lived in London. So yeah, we did a lot of travel. We would meet when I would go on a work trip. He would come with. He took me on a couple of surprise trips, and we just like created this little London life. And it's a chapter that neither of us will ever take for granted, or like just, it was so wonderful in every single way. So the London chapter of us, you know, basically living together and working and creating this little life of cohabitation. I've never lived with a romantic partner before this. by the way. So the narrative around this being like a very big transition and you have to have like very difficult conversations about expectations and all of these things, it literally just was not my experience. I'm not saying that that's not a wise thing to do, to have conversations about, you know, moving in together and doing that. We just never had to. It was like we were similar enough in the way that we live in our just like day-to-day life, the way that we like things, the foods that we like, the things that we do. All of it was similar enough that the dynamic was very, very natural. So there didn't have to be any of these sort of conversations of like, who's doing this chore and like, who's getting this grocery? It just was like, yeah, it was all very simple. The reason that I think that it felt very simple is that generosity to me is the cornerstone of a relationship. Emotional generosity, mental generosity, physical generosity, like all forms of being generous are the reason that a relationship can sustain. And there are going to be times that you don't feel like you want to be generous, or I think a lot of relationships struggle in sort of a tit for tat or who's doing more or effort. And if you can continue to just be generous and show up and give more, and if everyone does that, then everybody is winning. Obviously, this doesn't apply if you're, you know, continuing to be generous and the person that you're with is like not doing anything in return. That's obviously a different scenario. But it will only do your relationship a disservice to keep score, tit for tat, to continuously be more generous than you think you should be or ought to be or whatever. That will always be the answer, I think. And you will reap the rewards of that because you'll feel better and everybody will show up more. So generosity is a secret of relationships. Another secret is habits and routines and rituals almost. So we have this practice that we have every week that we started literally before we had met. So way back when I was in Italy, walking on the little treadmill, listening to voice notes, Adrian had said, because I had told him about the podcast, and he said, oh, do you ever answer people's questions? You know, you could call it Mondays with Maddie and you could just answer people's questions. And I said, you know, I've done some Q&A episodes, but I don't have like a formal, definitely not once a week, sort of Ask Maddie type of thing. But he ended up then saying, okay, well, here's, you know, it's Monday, so here's your Mondays with Maddie questions. And we've been together for almost 2 years. In 3 weeks, it'll be 2 years. And every single Monday, he asked me 3 questions. And then obviously we did one for Adrian, which is Tuesdays with Adrian. So it's Mondays with Maddie and Tuesdays with Adrian. And each of us give each other 3 questions. And they could be deep questions, they could be silly questions, they could be questions about our relationship, they could be questions about our families or our histories or what we want for the future. Like literally, like there's been obviously hundreds of questions now. And we do it every single week. And it creates an opportunity for conversations because it's not just, oh, I ask you a yes or no question and you just answer it. There's always like a conversation that comes from it. And the ability to get to know your partner, your love, forever, because you never stop being curious about them and you never stop asking questions. That, I would say, is another secret to a successful relationship. It doesn't necessarily have to be 3 questions once a week for each person, but having a ritual where you are focused and present and conscious about the actual person in front of you and only that, without anything else going on. And the fact that baked into that is also just like an endless curiosity about who that person is. It also gives you these mini opportunities to bring things up. So if you've had something come up during that last week and maybe you feel off about it, or maybe you just like feel curious or you want more information about something that happened but you didn't feel like bringing it up in the moment, it actually also gives you kind of this little moment to pose that question and sort of like frame a conversation if you want to. That said, I do also think that being able to bring up anything, anytime to your partner in a trusting and safe way is a no-brainer, and that you should be able to feel like you're able to do that, which we do very well. I'm not nearly as... This is something that I will say that I struggled with more and sometimes still do, to articulate something that I'm feeling without being afraid to, and has literally 0% to do with Adrian or his reactions to those things. He's always open and always wants to know those things. It's sort of like an inbuilt fear I have around every single thing feeling like high stakes, or at least that's how it used to feel. I've grown more and more and more comfortable over the past couple of years knowing that there is no such thing as a conversation that is so high stakes that you shouldn't be bringing something up to your partner, that that it's a completely safe thing to do, even if it like leads to a difficult conversation. Like, everybody is still staying in the ring and staying in the game, and that's been a learning for me. There's been many learnings I've had in this relationship, and all of them have been wonderful, because I think the final mile is what I call it in recovery, but also in relationship, where the last bit of your healing in a relationship you can't do by yourself. So you can go to therapy, you can work on all your stuff, which I did, I like to think that I've done, and get yourself to a place where you're actually at a level and a resonance to be able to like accept and bring in like really true healthy love. But you can only prepare up to a certain point for what that ultimate love relationship looks like. And the rest of that work has to be done from within the healthy, safe relationship, partially so that you get exposed to something that's healthier than maybe what you've had before, which is definitely the case for me. So it's like, what is love actually supposed to look like is a learning that you have only when you're in that like healthy love relationship. But you can't prepare for that. You can't heal that bit until you're in it. And there's also going to be things that new relationships, even the healthiest ones, bring out in you that you still needed to do some work on, and that give you the opportunity to do that, but like in a safe container of a love that like will hold you through it. So that final mile you do in the relationship, and that final mile, I don't know if the final mile, if it ever ends, you know. I still find myself learning and finding new ways to do things emotionally, and thinking of new strategies for when things come up. And I don't know that ever, I think that it might just be that it's an evolution, but stuff comes up way less and to a much less intense degree subjectively than it ever would have before. It's like, how do you encapsulate an entire 2-year relationship in just, you know, in a podcast episode without just kind of droning on and this happened, then this happened. But I was in London, we were living together. We knew from very early that I think we were going to be together forever. And it was, again, one of those, like, it just kept getting better. We just kept making better and bigger and more future-oriented plans. We started planning in quarters. You know, when you have a relationship that there's distance involved, you're kind of looking like 3 months ahead in terms of like, where are each of us going to be and which work trips and where are we going together and what do we want to accomplish in these like next 3 months together. But they just kept getting extended and extended. And then planning the move back to Canada happened about a year ago, July. So it was really excellent, you know, work-wise for us to stay in London for at least another year at that point. And so we decided, yeah, we'll do another year in London. And it was around that same time that we also decided that we wanted to have kids together. Both of us knew we wanted kids. We talked about that in the like trip where he came back from South America. We like talked about, you know, how many kids do you want? Do you want to be married? Blah, 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 blah. All of those things we talked about very early on. So like aligning values initially, another big relationship tip. Just like get that stuff discussed out of the way. I don't know how people get years into relationships and are like, oh, do you want kids? But like, what if that was important to somebody and not to the other person, and you only figure that out once you've dedicated, 3 years of your life, and now you're like, I just think really, really fundamental life choices, you should at least have an idea that you're aligned on those things from like day one. And I don't think it has to be a weird conversation of like, do you want my babies? Do I want your babies on date number one? But do I visualize a future and a life that has children is like a very important thing to know when you're entering a relationship. That, I don't know. Maybe not, like, I don't know. Maybe other people are more like relaxed about that, or they could go either way. I think that's true. But you should at least check that the other person is also on the same page. So it's less about you knowing for sure whether you want kids and knowing for sure that you and the person you're with have a similar mindset about it. That, I think, is the real key. Anyways, we had that conversation ages and ages before. I knew that we would probably get engaged at some point, that he would move over to Canada, that we would be starting our life there. We knew that for sure. It was really just a matter of when. But then, yeah, we talked about babies, and we're like, there's no reason to not just like start trying now. I was less fussy than probably I would have been several years before about like being married first. Obviously doesn't matter to me, but knowing that we were going to get married at some point, and that we both had the same perspective on marriage and its importance, and like what it signified to both of us was already known. So I knew it was just really only an order of operations thing. And I was 35. So there's also that where I was like, well, there's like really no need to delay. Let's just get things moving. Because if you want more than one kid and you're already 35, I don't know. There's just like, there's some math involved where if you have preferences about when you have kids by and your physical age, that's something that you actually can't get around. There's a lot of things in life that you can say, you know what, I'll write my book when I'm 40. I'll do this and that. And it doesn't mean that people don't have kids totally successfully and healthfully later on in life, but it's not as straightforward. And that's just a fact. So it made sense to just kind of get going along that train. And at the time, I thought in my head, yes, it would be great if we just like got pregnant right away. Some people like, they try and that's it. And trying, by the way, is just not trying. Unless somebody else knows of something else that I don't know. It's like if you say you're trying for a baby, it just means that you're not preventing pregnancy. So I thought, knowing that we would be moving back to Canada kind of in the summer of 2025, I kind of thought it would be great to actually like get pregnant in February. But I didn't say that to anybody. I just like said it in my head. I was like, that would kind of actually be my ideal timeline, I think. But if we got pregnant sooner than that, it would have been totally fine. It just would have accelerated the move over, because having at least half of the pregnancy in Canada and being settled here for at least a period of time did make sense. So anyway, flash forward, I got pregnant in February. And I will definitely, probably next episode, talk about fertility and what that was like after having an eating disorder. Because what's been like missing from this entire story, and like I don't even know if anybody's going to find this. I just like talking about it, and I like telling this story. But what's been obviously missing from this story is my eating disorder, and that's because it wasn't there. It wasn't in attendance for all of this, for our ability to travel, for my ability to have someone cook for me all the time and eat normal food and just like live a normal life and continue to rediscover what my relationship with movement and the gym and my physical body was, what intimacy is like after having an eating disorder. I could do an episode about that. Like that's a mind blower, that one. So there are so many things that my eating disorder did not ruin in the last 2 years, but would have if I had not been well before that. So there has been like no ugly rearing head of the eating disorder in the context of a relationship. And that's exactly how I always dreamed of my life being. That's how I would want anybody that has an eating disorder to imagine their future life, because I don't believe at all that you are obligated to carry your eating disorder into the future. I don't think you have to deal with this for the rest of your life. I think it's a choice to make, to get out of it and to stay out of it, and to then just like thrive and continue to prove to yourself that you thrive without your eating disorder. So like you really don't need it. Life is much better if a relationship, a family, a career, close relationships, friendships, self-worth, if any of those things are like a priority for you, they don't coexist with an eating disorder. They just don't. All of the good things in life do not coexist with an eating disorder. So everything that I've successfully been able to manifest in the last couple of years, especially in this relationship, would not have been even remotely possible if I was also carrying an eating disorder around. I never would have met Adrian if I still had my eating disorder. Like nothing would have worked. And it's a stark kind of thing to think about, that you are missing out on stuff, and you know, God has his divine timing and reasons for stuff takes as long as it takes, and we couldn't have met each other at any point earlier for either of us. Like we met at the exact time that we were meant to meet. But you are wasting your life away if you're still not recovering from your eating disorder. And the time will go. The time will definitely go. So yeah, I basically manifested getting pregnant exactly when I wanted to, which was great and perfect and exciting. And then about a month later, maybe not even, unbeknownst to me, all the things that had been happening behind the scenes, Adrian proposed in Sedona, in Arizona. And I have never been more surprised in my entire life, despite the fact that I knew for sure that we would be together forever. I knew that he would propose at some point, but we didn't like need to have conversations about it. And I wanted it. Like I definitely wanted to get engaged, and also knew that we would be. So I knew it was only a matter of when. And we never talked about rings, and we never talked about like, how would you want this to be? And because he wanted it to be such a surprise that he just like purposely never brought it up, and had been planning it for months and months, and everybody knew but me, my family knew. So yeah, so that was magic. Maybe there are probably, like anything, different preferences about how people want to have their engagement and how people want to have that go. But I think surprises are great, and not knowing and having it truly be a genuine surprise, there are not that many opportunities that you have in life to have something be such a genuine surprise like that. So yeah, I meant he had like an interim ring that he gave me when he proposed, which I still wear on this hand, and then basically wanted, you know, my input and my say, and us to kind of like design my actual engagement ring, which is over here now. So yeah, then that happened in March. So that was, yeah, it was like ideal, totally ideal. I guess what I'm saying is that everything that you possibly want is on the other side of all of the things that you haven't dealt with yet. So yeah, I guess that's kind of that's the relationship story. That's a happily ever after. We started trying for babies, and we traveled, and we got pregnant, and we planned our move back to Canada, and we did it. And now we're moving to a house. The things that you want doesn't have to be marriage and babies, just because it was for me. But if there are things that you want in your life, you can have them, but you have to get rid of your eating disorder first, because it's clogging up the pipeline of happiness and energy that needs to be able to flow to you in order for you to get all of these things that you want. So this is the last episode of the Uncovery podcast that will be done here. This is always where it's been. I've lived here for 11 years. I have sold the condo. We bought a house. We're moving in 4 days. Almost all of the eating disorder kind of took place here. It was longer than that. Like it existed before I moved into this condo, but I carried that eating disorder into this condo, and I'm not carrying it out. There's been a lot of like pain and loneliness and isolation and destruction and real like self-harmy type eating disorder behavior. Like it all has happened in here. So there's plenty of really beautiful memories that I've had in here. There's been plenty that are not. So it's been like a really interesting chapter. That's basically been the most formative years of my life have taken place in this living space, and now moving away from it. This condo has been, it's a home. I've only lived a couple of places, right? So it's a bigger chapter, it's a bigger chunk of my life. It's had much more significance than, somewhere that I would have lived transiently or like for a year or whatever. It does feel like there's a lot of meaning, and there's been a lot of self that's developed in the time that I've lived here. So it does feel like a big deal to kind of pack it up and move on from it. It's places where I've had heartbreaks and really, really difficult admissions to myself about how sick I've really been, and it's where I've had to make a lot of correct, good decisions about nourishing my body and resting when I really, really, really didn't want to. And I did it all by myself, and I did it here. And by myself, of course, with immense amounts of support and resourcing and things that I chose to bring in to help me. But like there was a lot of just like me versus me in this space, just desperately trying to take the next step, as small as it might have been at the time, to get myself well. That was a huge amount of effort and time that was spent in here doing that. So yeah, so it's full of memory and different levels of positive and negative energy have sort of been a part of that journey since I've lived here. Recently, it's been full of all kinds of joy and preparing for this baby and preparing for this move and, joining our lives even more fully, in Canada, where we're going to be staying. So yeah, it's ending on an extremely, extremely high note, which I couldn't be more grateful for. Now it's time to move on to something else. So this is the last episode in coming to you from the condo. There will be a new setup of some kind next week. Don't know what that's going to look like yet. Probably maybe like this, but a different window and maybe a different sofa. But yeah, that's what's next, is moving on. So it's time to pack. It's time to turn another page. And yeah, thanks for being here.